Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse. You're on the Bible Forum. This is Sunday, uh, April 7th, 2018. Unless you really don't pay attention very much, you know that we as a culture are embroiled in a social justice debate. And it impacts not just the political world, it impacts the religious world. And not just among liberal religious people, but very conservative, Bible oriented people. One of those is a man by the name of John MacArthur. And I use his name because he has come to represent a particular wing of the religious world. He is in what's called the Reformed Protestant era or place, very strong biblically. He has published a recent series of denunciations of our current social justice fascination, a movement that is believed to infect evangelical churches in America. At issue is the observance of something called the victim culture as the central feature of the current social justice movement. The primary criticism that MacArthur levels, and he's not alone in this, he's just the spokesman, is that to see oneself primarily as a victim is to fail to see oneself as a sinner before God in need of repentance and forgiveness. Over against all of this is what we now know as identity politics, intersectionality, critical race theory, and even Marxism, along with a whole host of other intellectual currents on the left, which have been working their way into the general public for quite a while and are now finding their way into evangelical churches. At the same time, young evangelicals, urban evangelical churches, where issues of race and gender are more lightning rod issues than they are in other places, are becoming more prominent and pressing in all facets. Comparing the biblical idea of social justice with that of the world is not a comparison at all, but two entirely different ideas. And so too often the secular progressive thinkers define social justice to mean the uniform state distribution of society's advantages and disadvantages, while in truth social justice is really the capacity to organize with others to accomplish goals, ends that benefit the whole community. And if people are to live free of state control, they have to possess this new virtue of cooperation and association. Otherwise, they'll be dominated. This is one of the great skills of Americans, and ultimately the best defense against what is called statism, the belief that the state should control either the economic or social policy, or perhaps both, to some degree. But in this debate between the MacArthur wing of Reformed Protestants and the secular progressive urban evangelicals, the definitions are being scrambled so as to paint the MacArthurites as heretics, or at least biblically ignorant. So what is social justice from a biblical perspective, and where did it come from? Well, at heart, the concept is Catholic. In later years, it was taken over by secular progressives. When I say Catholic, I'm going back 1,000 years. In truth, many good and biblically orthodox Christians care about justice, and they don't lapse into the sort of identity politics or victimization fetish as others do. And many Christians have come to care more deeply about the justice issues simply because of the Bible, not because of neo-Marxism or any of these other isms. In history, social justice is often associated with some notion of the common good. Common good is a phrase from Aristotle, It's an Aristotelian term. That's how old it is. One that often hinges on the key question as to who decides what is the common good. In ancient societies, it was often considered that the wisest and strongest person, the ruler, for example, would decide. And he did. He'd decide where we're going to camp tonight, near which water source would we build our village, what would constitute a good community, things like that. In more contemporary times, beginning about 100 years or so ago, that responsibility gradually shifted to the bureaucratic state. Decisions became too numerous for a single ruler to make, so they became delegated to a variety of organizations. As societies evolved, those decisions often came to be decided by many people at once. No longer was there one clear person to be held responsible and accountable for the decisions, but rather the community decided. And eventually the beautiful notion of the common good got ensnared in red tape. We see it in our country. In America, the Puritans played an extremely important role in the shape of the new constitutional republic. Steeped in biblical teachings, Reformed Protestants have a very long and rich tradition of reflection on justice and politics. John Witt's The Reformation of Rights meticulously documents the impressive ways that John Calvin's heirs used Reformed theology to shape political thought and structures in Europe and in America. The structure of the family, the laws of a community, the authority of human government, the foundation of currency, the value of education, the crafting of biblical society. Today we are watching the decline and collapse of liberal evangelicalism. We're watching the dismantling of mainline Protestantism. We're watching the moral dismembering of the Roman Catholicism and the dismantling of the very form called church. What's left as a visible expression of church is largely theater. Daniel Strand, a Providence contributing editor and postdoctoral fellow for the Center of Political Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University, suggests that the cry today is for social justice, a structure which arrives with very little true justice. The application of this particular theory would suggest that in a just society, there would not be the openly immoral acceptance of abortion on demand, nor would there be the acceptance of divorce or the redefinition of family or gender. There would not be the increasingly accepted matriarchal society, nor would our monetary system be based on good intention. In reality, social justice is not more than the capacity to organize with others to accomplish ends that benefit the whole. Does transgenderism benefit the whole community? No. What about divorce on demand? Allowing that there are reasons for divorce, but not just because you feel like it. Or couples living together without, as we say, benefit of clergy. How do the children of these people benefit? What value system do they inherit? And where does that take us? Well, look out your window and you'll see where it takes us. So much for social justice. Our black brothers and sisters struggle the most. In Christ, they know they're equal. Yet in the broader culture, that equality can be artificial. I think it's better than it's ever been, but it still can be artificial. Where there's a real and true church family, that artificiality is gone. I don't know if it's in your church that way. I have never been in a racist church. I've never been in a church that did not respect all the people in that church equally. Even people who walked in off the street that you didn't know and maybe had serious issues were still treated with respect. The problem here is that there are so many churches that are not really churches. And that's just another way of saying the membership are not truly saved. They're not actually Christians. I can hear it. How do you know that? Well, in most churches today, being a Bible Christian is not a prerequisite for membership. Emotion is. Desire is. Being slain in the Spirit is. Joining the church is the same as being saved. You get the point. Politically, socially, religiously, we're playing games. Most of us don't know that, and that's what makes it worse. The society at large will never experience true social justice, not this side of heaven. We will constantly substitute political, social, and other forms of rhetoric and equality, but it won't be real. How do I know that? Because it's not real now, even in the most socially conscious groups. You say, yeah, but we had a black president. That was it. I wept when that man was elected. To think that our nation could do, it still whelms up emotional with me, that we would do something like that. I was proud of this country. I couldn't vote for the man because of his politics. But we learned later that this man was largely a set piece. And more we're learning just how out of the loop he really was. My favorite illustration, because it's so dramatic, is Benghazi. When Benghazi was under full attack, Americans fighting and dying in a foreign country, dying because of decisions that were made by his administration here. Our president was in a side room playing cards with a Secret Service agent. Oh, come on, it's not. The Secret Service agent is the one telling that story. And just look at the chaos that his administration visited upon this nation. I know the liberals applaud him. The business, legal, financial, and military communities are only now starting to recover from his administration. Social justice is a one-on-one thing. You can't legislate it. You can't elect a black president and expect everything to go away. It's only as people begin treating one another justly, equitably, that there's going to be any unity, any change. Breaking down the family structure, breaking down the gender structure and the social structure does not make for equality. It only creates more chaos. And God is not the author of chaos. And I think you know who is. Now, a lot of this grows out of the common good idea. Clearly, common good idea is a communist or socialist concept. But how does it work? Well, the communist system invests a great deal in the common people. They do so in the name of common good. Almost every aspect of the people's lives are structured and controlled by the government. Now, when an individual stands up and suggests that they have the right to do this or that, the government is there to step in and decide if any of that's true. For example, who has the right to live in our country? Those who contribute to the common good, which includes living arrangements, food, education, and so forth. You want to marry outside your nationality? Well, now the government has a say. You say this becomes the government's excuse, an excuse upon which totalitarianism is built. Common good trumps your personal desires. Common good demands citizens make comparable contributions in return. Individual desire must now bow to the common good of all. Enter the progressive agenda. It begins with a lack of faith in the new discoveries and in the new vitalities of what is capitalism. The progressive agenda favors the collective, not in the same way as communism, but similar. Under the progressive agenda, individualism is a threat. Collectivism is a comfort. It's illustrated by towns and farms. Farming is what God gave us to do, taking care of one's family and friends. Town folk busying themselves with collective pursuits of schools, fashions, and stores, and so forth. And all the middlemen who sell farm produce and town products benefit. And then we enter into progress, where we gather together a number of craftsmen in workshops. As business then begins to develop, we hire more workers. Eventually, we have factories. And as the factories and so forth grow, farmers find steady employment, minimizing their ability to farm. Now workers are entirely dependent upon the wages that are being paid. It was called wage slavery. The progressive era evolved to the right some of these, in order to right some of these wrongs. It meant being on the side of labor, the proletariat, Marx called it, meaning people who work in factories, dependent upon their employers, workers lost, or having lost their independence, the solidarity of their old way of life. Interestingly, reproductive rights became one of the main elements of the new progressive agenda. No, not talking about Bernie Sanders, talking about the 1800s. That was the new progressive era. The privileged in this world would have unfettered access to the reproductive health and education services to decide for themselves when and whether to bear or raise a child. The poor and the disadvantaged didn't get that right or opportunity. Accordingly, those who would labor to achieve economic social justice are called upon to join in the effort to achieve reproductive justice and thereby help realize the sacred vision of a truly just society for all. That's how today abortion can be considered social justice. Recently, we have gay rights considered to be social justice. The issues are then framed around compassion. Since about 1832, almost everything has been done in the name of the poor. Not in America, but in other parts of the world. Modern revolutions, the Nazis, the communists, by African and Asian despots, most of which justified their actions under the banner of socialism. In recent years, the battle has come to America under the banner of the War on Poverty, 1964, President Johnson and the Democrats. Then came the abortion on demand, early 1970s, to free women. Did you know nearly half the pregnancies in Washington, D.C. end up in abortion? And that 70% of the children that are born out of wedlock. What's happening in America is the largest scale abandonment of women by men in human history. Then came no-fault divorce and finally transgenderism. What was billed as the war against poverty, the war against crime, and so forth, has decimated the family. And all for the same reason: to free people from the restrictions imposed by God. God is the great oppressor. The reduction in births is having an impact on senior citizens. Social Security is based on 7 workers for every benefit receiver. Today, the ratio is 2 for every beneficiary. And that's because of birth control and abortion. There is going to be a great crisis of social democracy in the next 10 years. What was meant by social justice originally? What was meant was equality. But people are not born equal. They're not the same size, the same strength, have the same talent, same abilities, same personalities. They're not equal. And all this inequality produces uniquenesses, which result in differences. Differences in skills, health, strengths, weakness, unequal fortunes. You see, we can train animals, but we can't train people, not fully. People are far too complex to easily fit into an externally imposed mold. They have a will. They have available to them a wide diversity of gifts and vocations and callings. Back in the day, de Tocqueville took a tour of the United States. He discovered what he called the most fascinating and insightful thing about America. Namely, that wherever in France people turned to the nation, and wherever in Britain people turned to the aristocracy, in America people got together and formed associations. They hold bake sales, he said, to send missionaries to the antipodes, to build colleges. They invent 100 devices to raise money among themselves. That's what a free people do. That's what a democracy is. The first law of democracy, Tocqueville wrote, is the law of association. If you want to free people, for them not to be swallowed up by the state, you have to develop in them the virtue of cooperation and association. It's not an easy virtue to learn at first, but it soon becomes a vast social phenomenon. It's not at all uncommon for 30 college students to show up for a presidential campaign, say in New Hampshire, and organize a whole state just for their candidate. They've never done that before, but they know how to use a Rolodex, and they can very soon organize an entire state. It's a skill they learned. It's one of the great skills of Americans. We are in the process of abandoning all of that. As we see our politicians and our change agents and others working feverishly to put us all into one pot and let them run us. It's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not what God ordained. And we're paying the price for it.